of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. When I was first starting out as a professional actor, I took a course in New York City in how to audition, which was taught by a man named Michael Shurtleff, who had been a Broadway casting director for many years. Auditioning, trying out for a part, is a highly concentrated experience. You have just a few minutes to show what you have uniquely as an actor to bring to the role. And auditioning is a particular skill that you have to learn. It's a little different than acting, just by itself. Michael Shurtleff's teaching was based on what he called the 12 guideposts, which he had developed over his years as a casting director on Broadway and in Los Angeles. These guideposts were specific ways of looking at whatever the scene was that you were auditioning with to help you bring it alive. For example, what are you fighting for in the scene? Where's the humor in the scene? What was the moment before the scene, right before, to give you your place to start as you come in? But the first guidepost, and the most important one, really the one on which everything else rested, was this: find the love in the scene. In every scene, he said, there's always love somewhere. It's either being sought, or it's being discovered, or offered, or ignored, or misunderstood, or refused, or celebrated. Somewhere, if you look hard enough, you will find it. And it's always conditioned by the particular relationship, whether it's a romantic attachment or a family relationship within a family or a friendship. You can even find it in somebody that you can't stand. We humans are hardwired to connect with each other. So what's getting in the way? Why can this person not stand me? Or why can I not stand him? What do we do about that? This principle of finding the love in the scene, I found that it held absolutely. This principle was just one of the many little things that I came across in my professional development, which I eventually came to see was most truthfully described in the language of faith once I started coming to church, back to church in my early 30s. I came to understand what the source of it was. And the source of it is actually something we see from a slightly different angle in today's gospel story. This particular story, famous story, is part of the final conflict between Jesus and the Pharisees. It's after the triumphal return to Jerusalem. It's just before his trial and crucifixion. The Pharisees, whose power Jesus threatens, because the infinite power of Jesus' faith is exposing the shallowness and the hollowness and the hypocrisy of their faith. This story is one of several in which the Pharisees try to trap Jesus into saying something that will discredit him in the eyes of the people. But Jesus shows all these efforts to be superficial and meaningless, and Pharisees just, they walk away. They have no response. They look foolish, as in today. Particularly so in this story. They don't ask Jesus a question to which they really want an answer. It's not about any sincerely held principle. It's just a tactic. They ask him, is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not? This is not a question about taxes in general. Jews in first century Palestine were used to paying taxes within their own society. They paid temple taxes, they paid land taxes, customs taxes. They are talking here about taxes paid to their Roman occupiers. It's a census tax. Everybody, every Jew between the ages of 12 and 65, male and female, slave and free, had to pay the Romans an annual tax of 1 denarius. It wasn't a lot of money. It was the average daily wage of a common laborer. But the whole question of paying these taxes was very hot at that time. The vast majority of the population, the common people, didn't like the tax because they didn't like anything connected with Roman rule. They chafed under the Roman occupation. And over the years of the Roman occupation, that feeling was hot enough sometimes to boil up into open rebellion. This is why, as we heard Matthew tell us today, the Pharisees had Herodians, that is, supporters of Herod, the king who was the Roman puppet ruler, along on this little mission. So Jesus is going to get into trouble no matter what he answers. If he says, no, you shouldn't pay taxes to the emperor, he's going to get in trouble with the people who are going to report back to Herod. If he says yes, then he gets in trouble with the common people who hate the Romans and who have been his main source of support. So they think this is perfect, we've got a win-win here. And Jesus' famous answer to the question is, he calls for a coin, a denarius, the amount of the tax, and he asks whose head is on it. And when they say it's the emperor's, he says, give therefore to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and give to God the things that are God's. Now these words have been interpreted in slightly different ways over the many centuries. For example, that things like taxes have nothing to do with the life of faith, or that religion is a matter of the heart and has nothing to do with how we handle our money, or that the law is the law, and our duty as Christians is to support the social order. I know of one contemporary writer who says that with these words, Jesus shrugs. That's what he says, as if to say, who cares? Why is this a problem? As though the two realms, of that of the emperor and that of God, were obviously separate and clearly defined, as clearly as the time that we spend in church is distinguished from the rest of our week, which I hope we all know it's not. None of this gets it right. Earlier in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus clearly says, no one can serve two masters. You cannot serve God and wealth. In today's story, this story, he reminds his hearers of who their real master is. When Jesus calls for the coin, he asks, whose head is this and whose title? The Emperor Tiberius' title, engraved on every denarius along with his likeness, was this: August, son of the divine Augustus, high priest. Divine. That should be a red flag to anyone who believes in God. Certainly any believing Jew would react to this. Jesus is reminding his hearers of the Jewish law's prohibition against idolatry. He is reminding them that there is one who is divine and no other. He is reminding them of whose world this really is. And it's not Tiberius. The story is not about the separation of church and state. Jesus is not providing us with a means of understanding the rules of the different realms of our lives, because there is only one true realm, one authority, and that is the kingdom of God. How could it possibly be otherwise? There are plenty of other mini-realms by means of which we humans attempt to imitate that great one that we all inhabit. But these mini-realms are all our creations, human creations, which means that at some point they're going to break down. And when we try to live by them alone and put the realm of God aside, we are deluding ourselves. We're living in falsehood. Jesus is not telling us either to pay our taxes or not to pay our taxes. He's talking at a far deeper level. He is saying, as you are aware of the kingdom of God, the one true realm, how are you going to live your life today? What is God asking of you right now? That's the question. Then decide how it applies to your taxes. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about from fairly recent history. The Lutheran pastor and theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a hero of mine, was a young man in Germany during Hitler's rise to power. He was a leader of what was known as the Confessing Church. It was a coalition of Protestant churches which arose in opposition to Nazism. In the late 1930s, just before the war, Bonhoeffer was sitting with a friend in an outdoor restaurant when a table of Nazis stood up and began singing a Nazi song. Times being what they were, everybody else in the restaurant also stood up and joined in. And so did Bonhoeffer. He got up and began to sing as well. And this is a pastor, and his friend was shocked and looked up at him and said, "What are you doing?" And Bonhoeffer raised him up and he said, "We have more important battles to fight than this." Bonhoeffer, he knew that by not standing and singing, he would be shining a big, dangerous light on himself and his movement, and thereby putting them both in jeopardy, at risk. 5 years later, Bonhoeffer was arrested for his part in a plot to kill Hitler. He spent 1.5 years in jail and was eventually executed by hanging. In both of these instances, first in acting falsely as though in sympathy with the Nazis, and then attempting to break a commandment in trying to kill their leader, Bonhoeffer was giving to the emperor the things that are the emperor's and giving to God the things that are God's. When Jesus answers the Pharisees' question, as he does, he puts the responsibility on us, as he does throughout his ministry. That's the point. Jesus is always trying to open our eyes to the presence of God, here and now. He doesn't take us off the hook by identifying separate realms of human loyalty. He reminds us that there is one commitment that grounds and governs all the others. And this is a joyful commitment, one that we can embrace because it's a commitment that doesn't bind us, it sets us free. This is why Michael Shurtleff was right. There is love somewhere in every scene because of the eternal presence of God's love in all our lives, which is always active and always looking to break in. When we give to God the things that are God's, we are living in the real world. The real world. We're living in the truth. And that's the truth that sets us free. Thanks be to God. Amen.